Good morning, distinguished colleagues. Now we're starting the first session on the discussion of new incentives to the development of mining and metallurgy sector in Kazakhstan. The first session will be intensive. It will comprise of two parts. The first one is an expert panel. It would take 35 minutes. During panel discussion, we have a regulator agency or competent authority represented by Ruslan Baimishev, and we have the representatives of business HMP that combines more than 100 companies, and this association is represented by Nikolay Radostovets, and also we have representatives of legal consulting companies. And Zarina Baikenzhina, she will be talking about legislation and behavior analysis. We'll have 4 slides, actually 4 or 5 slides will be demonstrated, and we'll go through them as fast as possible. And we'll have 35 minutes to have this part of the session in the format of a discussion. The slides are already on the screen. Please switch on the first slide. Please share the first slide. The first slide on the issues of the deepening of the reforms in subsoil use. Member of the working group on subsoil code development, Diyar Ereshev. Thank you, Almat. Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, and I would like to go through the changes that are planned within the working group. Being a member of a task force to develop the subsoil use code and amendments which are in the process, I would like to share the background. As you know, the subsoil code has become an important milestone in the reforming of a subsoil use. We had a lot of barriers, and legislative reform allowed us to implement the best models of regulation based on first-come, first-served principles. The revision of the legislation simplifies the procedures for getting a subsoil use right, which is confirmed with the statistics. And we see that in the market we get new players and junior companies, which is very good for the market. On top of that, adoption of the code created conditions for the reforms announced by the head of the state that contributes to development of competition and appearance of junior companies at the market, and all these strengthens the measures for environment protection. And at the same time, we have accumulated experience. The codex is in force for more than 3 years, and we have accumulated some law enforcement practice, which proves that the code on subsoil needs further improvement, and this work is in process. And I would like to say that these changes will be very particular, that are required for better fine-tuning of certain procedures, considering the availability of the experience of application of the code. We have both negative and positive experience of that, and we have key factors deciding what could be the changes in the legislation in the future. First of all, it relates to the process of adaptation of the market participants to the new model. It takes more time, and not every participant of the market are prepared to accept this model. We have some market participants who have accepted this model positively, but we have some negative trends when some participants abuse their rights, and we call them unfair participants of the market. Especially it is visible at the stage of auction systems. As you know, the code provides for that the sections of subsoil firstly placed at auction, and in the process of law enforcement, we observe that we have participants who use auction systems, and they undermine the auction and try to remove the competitors. So these auction mechanisms require further improvement. Now we are developing the package of amendments to improvement of auction mechanism to minimize abuse risks. The next block of amendments is related to the issues of commercial mining and withdrawal of stripping masses in the course of exploration. The experience proves that we have subsoil users who abuse the absence of a detailed mechanism of rock mass withdrawal that results that some subsoil users at exploration stage are already involved in mining. And the lack of regulation includes the lack of procedures on providing the permit for using the extracted rock masses, and now we are considering the issue of simplification of a transition from exploration to mining stage. The Vice Minister mentioned that in accordance with the code, to get a license for mining, one would need to have resources. At the level of the resources, we need to have reserves. At the level of resources, the code prohibits transition to mining. So in global practice, the transition is possible at the stage of the resources. And this issue requires joint work with taxation authority, as taxation issue is raised here, and we have adopted several regulatory acts in the sphere of environment and administrative procedures. And these administrative acts and the code on subsoil have some collisions, and we are working on this issue so as to resolve these barriers within the framework of amendments to the legislation. And coming back to the issues related to simplification of the transition from exploration to mining stage, here we have an issue related to the transition to royalty system. We believe that the issue of simplified transition from exploration to mining raise the importance of implementation of royalty systems. So when we are talking about royalty, we mean taxation not at the moment, not at the query, but at the stage of sales of the final commodity product. That would simplify the subsoil uses issues. One would need not to have estimated reserves to have the resources. So the amendments do not change the existing concept of the code. Mostly they aim to clarify certain position in the code, and the objective is to strengthen protection of fair investors and to strengthen the interests of the state so as to keep the balance between the interests of government and subsoil users and remove unnecessary barriers. We believe these changes would improve business climate, transparency of the decisions made, and their predictability. Thank you for kind attention. Thank you. Considering that we are in panel discussion, having the discussion, so you can go through the slides. The next slide is on the key challenges for mining sector in Kazakhstan, and the Executive Director of the Association of Mining Sector Companies, Nikolay Vladimirovich, the floor is yours. You can speak from your seat. Welcome and all the participants. It's easy for me to speak from my seat, but I would like to welcome all of you while standing. All the participants of mining, and say that we are meeting in a difficult time and we have a lot of things to be discussed, and I would like to have a live exchange of opinions. I don't want us to close eyes on the existing problems. So the key challenge for Kazakhstani mining sector is the growth of financial load and depleting of mineral and raw materials base and a low replenishment factor, high production cost, and in industrial inflation. We cannot stop it. Since 2023, obligatory pension contribution of the employer will be introduced since 2025, MET tax will be implemented, and I believe it will increase the environmental loads that will have significant financial implications, and we are concerned about implementation of carbon tax since 2026. But colleagues at the companies, I know, I am contacting with the heads of the companies. We are concerned where and how we can sell our products, what could be the sales prices, and we have observed that some companies observe the decrease in the amount of production in the most recent weeks, and we are concerned for the search of alternative ways of promoting export cargo to maritime ports in the conditions of restriction and sanctions. And now, together with the government, we are seeking for the opportunity and seeing how we can develop green and transit corridors that we admitted previously that have not been developed sufficiently, and we do not have sufficient alternatives. We have to expand the opportunities of supplies to China and to have long-term intergovernmental agreements with the growth of appropriate infrastructure. We need to have an intergovernmental agreement on the issues of promotion of Kazakhstani cargoes through Aktau, Azerbaijan and Georgia ports. And we do not want to hear that an operator will exist here. We need to have an intergovernmental agreement that would establish tariffs and the volumes of deliveries and to have it guaranteed. And we are prepared to invest in this infrastructure, but we have to mention what should be done and how it should be done. And I think these issues should be discussed today. And we are working on how we can move our cargoes through Russia and through Azerbaijan to Georgia. The key issue of whether Kazakhstan Timirzhali will be capable to do that. Can we count that Russian railroads will help us with that in the conditions when this company is suffering the sanctions? And in this regard, today we are discussing with the ministry these issues, and we would like to make our own proposals. We have private operators possessing locomotives and rolling stocks, and we have to work at intergovernmental level with Russia and Azerbaijan and with other states so as these private companies start moving Kazakhstani cargo. And this is a key issue, and I hope that in this case we will be able to avoid, if there are Kazakhstani companies with Kazakhstani locomotives, with Kazakhstani rail cars, why not to give them a priority right to transport the cargo so we could operate and we have confidence in the future. And this is a key issue that we would like to discuss today, and we also would like to listen to the ministry on in this regard. Mining sector of Kazakhstan, as you know, in the most recent months is actively encouraging to increase the revenues to the budget, and that has been mentioned several times by the head of the state, President Tokayev. Now it is planned to increase MET rates by 1.5 times. The mining sector of Kazakhstan announced new projects more than 3 trillion tenge for coming 5 years, and maybe it will be more. Everything depends on how we are going to work with the government, and maybe someone can say that miners workers have not paid enough taxes and the prices has grown, and we have to be honest, it's an absolutely different situation, and we analyze the situation 2022. Miners and metallurgists pay 20 or 30% more revenues to the budget than in the previous years, and the mechanism of taxation works. And we propose the government to meet with the shareholders and managers of mining sector to consider future perspective and to consider how many companies, many projects, many taxes can be provided and what could be the multiplication effect. We can listen to the opinion of experts. We can work with the investors on the conditions on the work of new projects. The minister should support the projects. Very precise work should not only provide guaranteed procurement from Kazakhstani mining sector and offset agreements. Sure, it is possible to be discussed, but in which format? We believe that the Minister of Industry must start paying attention to the projects that have been developed by our companies in the sphere of import substitution, and we are prepared to sign a long-term contracts with the companies operating in Kazakhstan and the companies where we can procure the commodity, but introduction of strict procurements with a list of compulsory sales and compulsory procurements on some unclear prices, I believe it to be one step back. And you see all the contradiction in the economy.
On the one hand, the prices on imported metals went down, and sometimes in these conditions it's not predictable, where we need a market-based mechanism in the mining sector, not only with the sellers but with the buyers too. I think we need to give it a thought to all these ideas. We have the new mining code that we passed recently, which is good, but we still have some challenges. For example, in taxation, we need some principles of risks, and we need to honestly speak about such taxes as royalty, which is common in the globe, and to what extent it can be applied in production sector, what kind of rates have to be applied, because it is an integral part and should be an integral part of the code as it was intended to be. And we need to step aside from 15% requirements, and we see support from the ministries to provide incentives for creation of new jobs and new productions in the sector. We have Mr. Baimishev here with us, and I would like to call on him to get inspired with the idea of establishing a single window principle for investors. We cannot continue to work in the way we have been working before, because we have to jump from one ministry to another in the regional structures as well. We cannot build something and we have to spend months and months for reconciliation procedures and approvals. And we are going to request to have a single window principle within the Ministry of Industry as investors to apply. And Mr. Baimishev, it has to be his steps to call on local government, local mayor's offices, and other departments, so that we don't spend months to get approval from each of them individually. I think the role of the Ministry of Industry has to be enhanced with that regard. And given the fact that the mining sector is now your responsibility, and we will do anything to simplify our procedures. We are looking for non-standard solutions, and we have to act fast. So the single window element should be established soon. We have a draft proposal available. And the last comments. Today we are oriented to reduce the coal production volume, but in fact we need to transform the coal mining sector. We insist to have a concept for coal mining sector. We don't have to decrease it, but we have to rather increase it and find new ways of its processing. We see how many other countries are needed in this resource, and we believe it's going to be effective, and we seek support of the ministry in our concept that we prepared. Kazakhstan has been and will continue to be a very important subsoil a country with a very strong subsoil sector. Thank you for your attention. We have a couple more slides, after which we will move to the Q&A session. I would like to raise the comments and show 4 challenges and possible solutions. The first one relates to land arguments. Remember, we used to have subsoil use contracts, and we transitioned to the subsoil codes. Now we have exploration and production licenses that are separate. The code is an excellent document that guarantees the right on production by void, but unfortunately, in the lower level, sometimes we see the lack of actions, from the mayor's offices in the regions. And in terms of enforcement of the codes, we might face some legal problems or legal provisions. Sometimes Akimats speak about the code on assets, the provisions regulating the assets. Sometimes they cannot properly categorize the land plots. For example, the code on property has certain provisions that might contradict to the procedure of withdrawal of the land plots. Maybe we can offer a solution through an exclusive right given to the government agencies. Maybe we have to look into how to change the enforcement practice, maybe through discussions with the local authorities or through making changes, enabling changes into the law, because direct negotiations between subsoil users and owners of the land lead to a dead end. Sometimes the owner of a land plot understands or tend to interpret this piece of land's value as if this person explored its resources. This is challenge number 1. The second challenge is pretty technical. And first of all, let me say that the licensing issue, the licensing procedure works perfectly well in accordance with the code, the way it is provided in the law, with compliance of all procedures and requirements and deadlines. It's an excellent work, but we face some technical issues. Remember, an exploration contract used to be a single document with several blocks. Now we have one license, one block, or one spot. It can be one deposit and several zones. If the distance between them is reasonable, it can be combined into one. But let's assume we have a bigger distance, a longer distance. Then we have to apply for several licenses, given the fact that we have to have different record-taking. Maybe geological committee can play the role here. Maybe we can have a document in the form of one license and with several blocks. As for the taxation, I agree with the government agency, with our colleagues as well. We still have certain challenges with the stability of the legal requirements. Investor, once coming to invest, has to have predictability in terms of return of investments, as well as fiscal steps of the government and fiscal requirements to avoid unnecessary risks. And in addition to the tax on subsoil use, there is another privilege for processing of minerals, exemption from tax on dividends. For example, if a project is implemented, there is a plan to eliminate this provision. And recently I asked the Ministry of the National Economy how much taxes you will collect and how much taxes Kazakhstan, how many benefits Kazakhstan received as a result of plans that were established as a result of such provisions. And I understand the idea of the ministry is simply to increase the tax rates. However, how it would impact investment climate, nobody looked into that. And my last issue is insurance. Insurance of liquidation of subsoil use operations. In fact, and it particularly pertains to the juniors who applied for a license and who have to obtain insurance. And costs relating to insurance, given the fact that the market is pretty limited, sometimes exceed the annual costs of operation. So the company tends to lose much more compared with what the government gains. Maybe as a potential solution, we may think about the real operation and real works the company is doing. For example, geophysics and geochemical works, maybe we have to relate it to the amount of work the company is doing that is subject to insurance, because the company has to have predictability with that regard. If a company has, for example, 10 blocks, we explain that we don't do something at this moment in each of them, but at the same time we appreciate the position of insurance companies as well. But it delays the exploration works. It creates barriers for a company. So maybe we need to look into potential options, because the capex, particularly for juniors, it's an issue. That's it. And our next presentation, Zarina Baikenzhina, senior lawyer from Lomax, about behavioral analysis and the development of legislation in subsoil sector. Good morning, everybody. In fact, today I want to touch upon kind of a philosophical, from one hand, topic, but it has a practical meaning, how the behavior of market players impacts the changes in the law. The code was passed, as you know, in December of 2017, and was subject to amendments for quite a long time, quite a long period. But we may split all these into two packages at the end of 2019 and January 2021. There was a package of provisions relating to changes in environmental code as following the adoption of the new environmental code, and the procedure for subsoil use or licensing procedure was changed. In fact, I think the market players well know the fact that the license was issued before, and only then the collateral was subject to provision. It's been a year since the changes have been made into the codes, and also some other provisions relating to a different problem I'm going to mention later. So what is the ratio behind these provisions, and what is the basis? The basis is the response of the government on behavior or trends from the market players. And the exploration license is one of the speaking examples known to many of you. Many licenses were issued, about 1,000 when the provision was drafted. At the same time, 80% of licenses are missing the pledges from the subsoil users in case of their liquidation. The government faced a risk that they have a lot of licenses that had been issued, but they still face the risks that the land treatment and other procedures will not be enabled once the project is closed. The government made attempts to restore the situation, to improve the situation through making changes in the law, and the procedure for licensing was subject to changes. Another example includes the model contracts. You know that there is banking deposits contracts or agreements and insurance contracts. We used to face different types and of different quality agreements on insurance and on pledges and banking deposits, guarantees. And seeing that situation, the government decided to introduce a standardized or model agreement which have to be used by everyone.
And one more example is auctions. We have recently participated in the auctions when the subscriber bonus amounted dozens billion tenge. It's obvious that nobody was going to pay these bonuses. It was just an abuse of holes in the legislation to get the license, but to get it for free. So what is my idea to market to an industry? Your behavior have direct impact on the legal field that you will play. What could be your conditions or what could be your legislation? And the more abuse we observe, the more abuse of holes or unfair behavior or abuse of principles of fairness of subsoil using established in the code, the more pressure you will experience, the less comfort you'll have for your operations, the more we'll lose the freedom and flexibility. Sure, our legislation is not the most flexible, and even though we are based on the examples of Western Australia, but still we are not fully compliant with the provision. But my presentation is just an encouragement for you to think about the issues I have raised. The more we deviate from the ideas of the code, the more reforms are discredited. At the same time, I would like to mention that not all subsoil uses are unfair and not all amendments taken by the government are caused by the subsoil use behavior. Another case. Quite recently we have heard that within the ministry, not the Department of Subsoil Use, but in some other structural division of the ministry initiated the amendments on procurement of subsoil users. Zarina, sorry, we have a couple minutes to get questions. So I'll try to use up my time. So, as for procurements, we have a proposal that the license condition should include the obligation of subsoil users to sign contracts with local suppliers, comply with procurement rules, and that may result in withdrawal of a license. Can you imagine the situation? It's unbelievable and unacceptable and unobjective and non-proportional. You see, we see the disproportion of a guilt and responsibility. What is a procurement procedure? It is a set of formal requirements, and the failure to comply with them may result in withdrawal of mild subsoil use right. It's unbelievable. So we'll encourage you to reconsider these amendments again, and as for signing contracts with subcontractors should be also reconsidered. We cannot resolve the issues of a particular sector on the account of other sector, on account of subsoil users. We have a question from the audience, couple questions from the audience, and then we'll have to move to another part. Almat, you raised all the problems. But the fundamental problem of development of junior companies market has not been raised. The code allows us to get license, but we got an absurd situation of environmental expertise, so-called screening, that was the second or the fourth category. And actually, we have to wait until your public hearing will start. You have to register for public hearing in February when hearing starts in April or May. We had a situation when a client had couple licenses in the same region, and one specialist would provide the fourth category and another specialist in the agency would provide the third category. So Minister of Environment adopted the code but has not explained your managers how to interpret the code, and the manager blocks significant volume of investments. And we are a servicing company, and we understand that our clients want to invest huge money, career, geophysics, and drilling. But as a result, the code was adopted, and regions have not agreed on how to interpret the code. And I'm asking this question because we have colleagues who have been developing the code. Every believes that exploration falls under the fourth category, but it appears that 70 or 80% of projects in exploration are included in the fourth category under the code. Could you please comment on? I think this is the questions that should be addressed to the developers of the code. And I think in the mining codes, the time frames are very clearly established. In terms of environment, we have to consider the balance of interest between ecology and investors. And I think we have to reserve more time to environments and to work with competent authority. Unfortunately, this issue exists, and I hope that the Minister of Environment will resolve it. With this, we will close the first part of the first session, and I'll thank the speakers of the experts panel, and I would request our colleagues who have presentations to join us to participate in the second part.